Good morning and welcome to the accessibility webinar. This morning, we're really excited and happy to have you. My name is Heather Ryan and I'm going to be your host today. I do have three wonderful presenters who are experts in accessibility, Sam, Karen, and David, who are going to be taking over the presentation. So we're just going to go ahead and change over to our presenter screens. So we'll just have our presenters come up with their screen. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over directly to them to take over the presentation. Have a wonderful morning and enjoy the presentation today. Go ahead, team.
Good morning, everybody. First and foremost, we are so happy to have you with us today. My name is David McGarry. I am a solutions engineer here at D2L, and I'm joined by Karen and Sam. I'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves really quickly. Karen, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. I'm Karen Hedrick. I'm accessibility test strategist at D2L. Take it away, Sam.
Hi, I'm Sam Chandrasekhar. I'm the accessibility lead. I work very closely with Karen. Thank you.
We will be your team today. Karen and I will be showing you some of the accessibility features inside of Brightspace, talk about some of the best practices in accessibility, and Sam is going to be answering your questions in the Q&A portion of the chat. As we progress through today, and there's sort of the official list of team members that are here to support you today. Just so you know, accessibility is a company-wide concern. Not all of us are accessibility test strategists, but we all believe that we have a responsibility to create an accessible platform that makes it really easy for teachers to create accessible and personalized learning experience for students. If you ever have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to anybody on this team or reach out to accessibility@d2l.com. Before we actually get started with the formal demo, there are a couple of key level setting terms that need to be dispensed with right away. First and foremost, when we talk about D2L, D2L is the name of the company. We create a product. Our product is Brightspace. Brightspace is the platform that lets you create really engaging, personalized learning for students and includes a wealth of productivity tools and accessibility tools that help create equitable learning experiences for every single student in your class. Finally, I'll often mention our community. We have a dedicated community where clients and company specialists can work together to talk about some of the key concerns that we have as an entire community. So when I reference the community, I'm talking about our Brightspace community online. Before we get started with the actual presentation, I wanted to cover some of the basic housekeeping options or items during the early portion here. First and foremost, you're going to hear me use the term district. I am located in Houston, Texas, where we are all about independent school districts. But just know that this blanket term can be used interchangeably with school boards or whatever the regional managing sort of managerial structure of your organization might be. I apologize, rather than use 10 different terms every time, I'm going to stick with district, but just know that I'm not trying to exclude anybody. Everyone's included. If you do have questions about anything related to accessibility, please don't hesitate to reach out to accessibility@d2l.com for further information. It's a great way to stay connected with the company about accessibility issues. It keeps you up to date with personal contacts that you can reference often when you have accessibility inquiries. The webinar is absolutely going to be recorded. So if you want to go back and revisit portions of this, or you want to share the webinar with others after the fact, we will actually record this and then it'll be posted on our education webinar site. I would encourage you to give that site a quick visit after you're done with the webinar today. There are a lot of other great webinars that have already been done and recorded on that site. That'll be a great reference for you. If you don't have Brightspace and you want to have Brightspace, please reach out to us at info@d2l.com and let us know. We can talk to you about what your individual needs are. help structure a plan that would work best for you, and then help you get onboarded quickly. We know that a lot of districts are trying to respond to the COVID-19 crisis right now, and we have special implementation packages just for that. Also, as a caveat, when we jump into the actual demonstration of functionality of this system, you may see differences in some of the content that you see in the site that I demo versus the content in your own Brightspace instance. That comes down to aesthetics and the way the individual pages are built. If you have questions about why your site is a little different, reach out to your Brightspace administrator in your district or your school and talk to them a little bit about what specifically you might want to address to add some functionality or how you can use some of the same tools and resources in your own setting. Oh, whoops, pardon me. All right, so with that being said, we have an agenda set for today. We're going to very briefly touch on the current state of accessibility, starting with sort of a definition of accessibility inside of Brightspace. After that, we'll talk about how you can create accessible learning experiences inside of Brightspace using tools that are embedded inside of Brightspace. We'll talk about accessibility considerations, ways that you can create truly individualized learning that's inclusive of all learners. We'll talk about best practices and accessibility all throughout. And then finally, we'll present you with a resources page, which will be a link to all of the resources that we'll talk about inside of this presentation and some additional resources that you can keep in mind. So let's start by talking about an overview of accessibility and what accessibility actually means. When we talk about accessibility at D2L, we're talking about differences. We are all different. We're all different in different ways. Differences in ability are one of the primary determinations for how we reach and impact student learning. Not just the differences in the abilities that we have, though, but the length of the differences that we experience. It's sort of akin to having a broken arm. During the time that your arm is broken, you would have this difference of ability, and you would need special considerations made for that. But eventually your arm might heal, and you may no longer need those same special considerations. So the length of time is important too, and we'll talk about how you can release conditions and help add functionality for students with differences in ability, and then remove those when the time comes to remove them. The culture of the individual who's impacted by the difference is also particularly important. Individuals react differently to their own individual differences, and the culture that they build around themselves and around the community of individuals who share similar differences is an important aspect to building out the content in terms of the terms that we use and the resources we provide. So we want to be mindful of that. We'll talk about differences in cognitive ability. We'll talk about the importance of protecting student information and giving students discretion in terms of how they use the accommodations that we provide for them. But most of all, we really want to talk about accessibility as an inclusive experience. Accessibility is not reserved for one student in particular, it's reserved for all students. Every student benefits from an accessible learning environment. So all the tools and resources that we talk about today are a part of building a really inclusive design. Just to give you sort of an idea, though, of some of the personas we will be addressing during this webinar, we're looking at the Microsoft persona spectrum. This gives us an idea of some of the sensory-based differences that a person might have. It could be related to touch, to sight, to hearing, to speaking. There are also intellectual disabilities that we need to address throughout here. So cognitive disabilities, disabilities that are related to mental health issues, or a student who just simply deals with distractions and interruptions and is a little more sensitive to them and may need accommodations to help make sense of all of that. So we just briefly touched on the current state of accessibility. We've talked about the accessibility mission inside of Brightspace, but now we need to actually look at some features of Brightspace that can help you create truly accessible content for all learners. During the demo portion of today, we're going to look at some basic accessibility settings. We're going to navigate the page using landmarks and links and talk about the best way to feature content on a screen to make use of those landmarks and links. We're going to talk about how you create accessible content using some of the content creation features inside of a course shell. We're going to talk about features for special access, and then finally we'll talk about just general accessibility features that you need to be mindful of. With that, let's go ahead and jump right into the functionality demo itself. So hopefully on the screen here, you can see a Brightspace landing page. Oh, I'm sorry, one last little housekeeping tip. If you have questions during the presentation, please, please, please don't hesitate to use the Q&A button that you should see at the bottom of your screen to ask your own question. Sam is our fearless leader when it comes to the charge of accessibility, and she's going to be answering your questions as time goes by. If we see a lot of common questions come up, then we'll be sure to address those in the stream of the presentation itself, and periodically we'll take a couple breaks to really get your questions about functionality. With that being said, hopefully you're seeing a Brightspace demo or a Brightspace landing page right on your screen. As we get started here, I was hoping that we can invite Karen, who is our accessibility queen, to talk about some of the key features of navigation in Brightspace, what are some of the best practices in navigating around the site, and some of the other settings and tools that you might want to keep in mind whenever you're using Brightspace and making it accessible.
All right. Ooh. Hope I can remember everything I want to say. Basically, the main page is divided up into regions. There's the navigation region, which contains the whole navigation bar, and the main region. So if you navigate by region, you can find your way quickly to the main area, and you don't have to slog through the navigation bar. Also, if you're using a keyboard and you start at the top, there's a button that says skip to main content, and when you use that, you'll be taken to the main content. So save you having to tab through all the links. I always like people to know about the little area at the top that we call the mini bar, which has the buttons that have the course selector and where to find new updates and new subscription messages if you're in discussions. And there's also, of course, the button where you can go into your own settings, and always like people to know where those are. You can navigate by heading if landmarks aren't your thing. Some people aren't aware that landmarks exist. Heading level 1 is usually where the main stuff starts. So looking for heading level 1 is the way to go for that. As for, oh my goodness, the navigation bar is there just so people remember where stuff is. And
so Karen, what about like dialogues, pop-ups?
Oh yes. So I guess since I mentioned the button with your name on it where the settings are, if you go into the settings, there's some
David and Karen. Sorry,
yes.
David talked. I also wanted to talk.
Oh.
I just wanted to remind everybody that you were talking about screen reader. It was so obvious to us that we didn't actually mention that.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, I was talking about screen readers, but some of these things, especially the skip to main content, is relevant for keyboard users as well. So there are some settings that are helpful to know. There's one about font for anybody who needs magnification. There are some settings that screen reader users should know about. For example, there's a checkbox. Now, some of these are kind of like preferences. They're not necessary to turn on, but I like people to know about them in case they prefer them this way. There's a checkbox to allow the dialogues that come up as pop-ups as opposed to dialogues. Some people prefer it this way. They should also allow pop-ups so that the pop-ups will actually load. But there's another checkbox for the HTML editor. You can turn it on or off. Some people, there is a way to skip past the HTML editor and get from, like, say, a title field to the body. So there's like, you can jump from the title field to the body quickly. There's a link that will get you there. But some people just want the editor buttons gone. So there's a way to turn that editor off so that you just get a plain text field. If you're not interested in using insert stuff or any of those buttons, you can just turn it off and it will simplify the experience. There's also a checkbox. This one's a bit more of a necessity. There's a checkbox for video settings. So if you check this box, it will make sure that the menu controls will show up for screen reader users, because otherwise they're transparent and sometimes aren't findable. So make sure that if you're using a screen reader and there are videos in the course, that you should check this box. There's some boxes in discussions and emails that can declutter your experience, but they're just preferences. So give them a try, see what works.
And I think the important thing here is that these are personal preferences. So when you have students who have their own individual preferences about how they encounter content in an online space, referring them to the settings under their profile, the account settings link, is a wonderful way to help them to begin to build a more accessible environment for themselves. So empowering them to set these settings. I find that the font size setting is actually a very common setting for almost every single user. We all have our preferences in terms of how we want to view content. I find that the older I get, the larger the font size for me. But having access to personalized preferences is a terrific first step when you're building out an experience that is an accessible experience for your users.
And all of these settings are written in, there's a link to a guide about accessibility and navigation in our system, and all of these settings are written down there. So if you were like, jeebers, slow down, I didn't catch all of that, they're all there. So.
And we will add a link to that in the resources section of this presentation. So you'll have access to that guide as well.
Another thing I guess I wanted to mention quick is a lot of, our pages use standard controls. So screen readers have lots of shortcuts for, finding buttons, drop-down boxes, check boxes, edit menus, form fields, whatever. So if you have a student who's new to their screen reader, you can probably find a cheat sheet of keyboard shortcuts that you can tell them how to find, like a heading or an image or whatever, so it can help them navigate faster if that's helpful. A lot of our widgets have headings, so that's another easy way to bop around the page, so they don't have to sit there and slog through everything.
And remember that sometimes the best way to determine the accessibility of a page is to try accessing the page content using the accessibility features that are available, or just using a keyboard. Challenge yourself every once in a while to take a step in the shoes of somebody with a learning difference, and try to go through the motions of learning using just the tools that they would have access to, and see what that experience is like for you. It can help you, it can make a big difference between creating content that just goes over the line of being accessible, and then creating truly inclusive content that invites every user to be an active member of the learning community, utilizing their own individual strengths and preferences. Now that we've talked about some of the accessibility settings that you can set for your profile, let's look at some specific features inside of Brightspace and talk about how they can be useful when you're actually creating content inside of course shells. In this particular case, I'm looking at an English course here. One of the very first tools that I wanted to talk about is a tool that's actually getting an awful lot of love from the Brightspace community right now, and that's the video note feature. Video note allows you to record up to 30 minutes of video using just a couple clicks of a mouse. So in this particular case, I'll add a video note as an announcement. When you click on the link to create a new announcement, it opens up this screen here. As part of your screen options, you'll have an Insert Stuff button. Clicking on Insert Stuff gives you the ability to add content to the screen, so you can upload files from your computer, you can pull objects from a learning repository, you can search YouTube and add links to videos there. But what we're really looking for here is the Add Video Note feature. When you're ready to record a video greeting to your students, all you would have to do is click on Add Video Note, and it'll pull up the webcam. Hi for the first time. Now you get to see me with my long hippie hair because I can't go to get a haircut right now, so letting it go. But when you're ready to record, you would just click on your new recording. Hi everybody, welcome to the course. I'm so excited to have you here. Please be sure to read through the syllabus thoroughly and let me know if you have any questions about the content. When you're done, you can click Stop Recording. Welcome to the course. You can preview your recording if you like, and when you're satisfied, just click on the next button to actually save the video. After you've recorded the video, you have the ability to add a title and add description. Believe it or not, this metadata is very important for screen readers to access, so I encourage you to use these data fields and include some meaningful data in them. So, welcome to the course message, and then the description, welcome, be sure to check the course syllabus for more information. Adding descriptive title, adding descriptive text is an important part of creating truly accessible video notes. Another great practice is to make sure that you tag your video with an appropriate language. The video note feature allows you to use any of your installed language packs, select the language of origin, and then toggle a switch to automatically generate captions for the video that you create. Once you've got this feature enabled, you just click Next, and it'll start rendering the video in the background. Don't be alarmed if this takes a little bit of time, because it actually has to go through and generate captions for the video. The longer the video, the longer it takes to actually transform this video, but as soon as it's ready, it'll appear on the screen. Since videos are such an important part of adding personality and really humanizing the online learning space, being able to use video notes as a way to deliver instructions to students is a really critical feature to building engaging content online. However, when you're adding video notes, it's important to be very descriptive about how you give instructions to students about accessing assignments, where to find resources, and there are particular languages or particular aspects of language that you need to consider whenever you're delivering those sorts of descriptions. So Karen, what would you recommend to somebody who is leaving instructions via video note to students?
I think I would say, imagine that you're talking to the student on the phone and that they can't necessarily see what you're doing. So yes, the video adds a good component for anybody who can, but what if you can't see for whatever reason, you can't see the video. So example, if you're drawing on a whiteboard or something, it's not enough to say, it looks a little something like this. Because if people can't see it, they won't know what you're talking about. So saying something like the line rises slowly, then it reaches a peak at such and such a level, and then drops dramatically, and then flattens out or something, so that you at least know what you're talking about. A lot of people think, oh my goodness, if I have to have a video, I need to make an audio description track. Well, no, if you build it into the script, like almost like you're doing a radio show, you can you can basically describe it as it goes and everybody benefits. And also, people can't misinterpret something like this to mean something else if they look at the video incorrectly. They have you telling them what you want them to get out of it, you know?
And it seems like a little bit too much because you're going to go through and describe in detail what it is you're talking about. But what I've found, especially, I've taught previously, I spent 7 years in the classroom, and of those 7 years, I spent 6 years working in co-teach classrooms where I was dealing with students with a variety of differences in ability. What I found is that by being more descriptive, by being a little more methodical about the pace of my speech, slowing the order of my words, being clear about the point I'm trying to make, every student ultimately benefits. It just so happens that those same sorts of behaviors are extraordinarily beneficial when you're adding things like captions to videos.
I'm so glad you mentioned the slow speech thing, because
Yes.
the captioning, it would make your editing and fixing of your captions a lot easier if it can understand you and do good captions the first go around.
Yeah, and auto captioning features have gotten significantly better as time has gone by, but it still takes some finesse to get the captions to show up in just the right way. So when you're recording videos and you're wanting to add audio captions, being mindful of your speech is great, but it just so happens that those same behaviors end up being great communication behaviors too. So now that we've created our video note welcome message, a student can view this video by just clicking on the play button. Hi everybody, welcome to the course. But they can also enable captions now using the 3-button or the 3-dot menu that shows on the bottom right here. By clicking on that menu and then toggling captions on, students can actually see captions. So excited to have you here, please. And they can read through the captions right on the screen. So now you've got an accessibility video that's placed right on your course page. So what happens when you have visual elements that you need to pay attention to? In this particular case, we're looking at a 2nd grade course, and the teachers very creatively used a chalkboard background and added sort of an agenda. This is extraordinarily cute. In fact, my wife is a pre-K teacher. When she saw this idea, she thought it was so neat. She loved it. She wanted to put it in her own course page with simpler words and descriptions for her kids. The problem with informational images like this, though, is that unless you're careful about the features of that image, it can cause some problems. So let's go in and just edit this assignment or announcement, and let's see what's wrong with this here. When you open up any object that you can edit inside of Brightspace, and this can be an announcement, a description, it could be a text for a quiz question. We give you access to a what you see is what you get editor that has a lot of publishing tools attached to it. We already saw one of these tools when we looked at the insert stuff button, but we also allow you to link content, and you can format text, and you can add headings to your text and change the font and whatnot. We also have at the very bottom right of the screen, though, some additional tools. We have a spell checker. If you're really into HTML coding, you can even view the page source in code. But most importantly, we have an accessibility checker right at the bottom right of the screen. When you open a page up, it's good to get in the habit of using the accessibility checker before you publish any content. So if I check the accessibility of this item here, it automatically shows me, hey, by the way, you've got an image here that doesn't have alternative text. This is an informational image. That means that I need to be aware of the alternative text that I attach to this image because the information in the image is important. So here I could just add the title, what should I do today, along with additional text that describes each of the individual steps. That way someone who is seeing just the alt text of the image will get access to that image alt text, and they'll be able to see it. Not only is this good for people using screen readers, but in cases where an image link breaks or something happens and the image is not able to render, the alternative text is what shows up in place of that image. So again, this becomes a fully inclusive feature because almost everybody can benefit from it depending upon the circumstances that they're encountering the content in. Once you've actually added the content, it's as simple as revisiting your issue, and then you can update it and the content will update right on the screen. So once we're done, we've added alt text to this, we could check it again and we would get approval. Keep in mind though, that alternative text really works when you're uploading images for the first time. So if we were to say, update this assignment here and edit, if we wanted to add an informational image to this announcement, we could go to the insert image button, click on it, find an image that we want to upload here. So maybe we want to add an image of the moose here, just to sort of add some color to this, and then click the add button. By default, Brightspace will not allow you to add an image without prompting you first to add either alternative text or designate that image as decorative image. So if I click this image is decorative and hit OK, it'll now let it go into the page. And if I run the accessibility checker, it's not going to find any issues here because we designated this image as a decorative image. So what happens then if you go back and you need to edit an image that you've inserted that is decorative, but maybe you need to change that and edit the values of it? If you click on an image that you've uploaded to any part of the HTML editor, just clicking on the edit image option or the image options, pardon me, on the right-hand side here, will allow you to go in and add a new image description so that you can add alt text if you need to. So you have access to those controls right from the screen. When you're ready, you would just hit update and go. Keep in mind though, that it's not just images versus text that's important. So if we jump back out to the beginning of this physics course, you can see that I've got now the little moose image there. I also have a graph that's showing here. Keep in mind that the way you describe images on the screen is not only beneficial for students that may be more auditory learners or students with differences in vision. But it can also help with students who may have achromatopsia, where they have problems discerning differences in color. If we were to look at this as more of a grayscale image, you can see that talking about the colors of lines is not necessarily useful when you're discussing a color-coded object. So being mindful of the objects you actually put on the page, that's particularly important too, and is also really helpful in building out truly accessible learning experiences for students. Let's jump back into the edit screen here though, because I want to talk about a little bit more about the HTML editor itself. Karen, do you have any tips for folks who are using an HTML editor to build out accessible content?
Well, like you said, try to keep in mind formatting and structure and things like that. So if you want to put headings into parts of your text, make them as actual headings, not just big and bold text, because that will give the semantic structure that a screen reader will find. Make, like you said, put the images on the alt text. If you're doing math or science, use the math or chemistry editor to make your equations rather than just sort of making the HTML look like math, because the math editor, the equation editor, apologies, will turn it into MathML, which then the screen reader has a better shot at interpreting correctly, like saying all the brackets and the exponents and the symbols as what they actually are, rather than, well, it's a 2 with a superscript on it. Don't know why. You know, that just helps to make sure that it's read as it should be, as long as the person's screen reader is supporting MathML. It does have MathML support. JAWS and NVDA both have MathML support. It's better in Firefox than Chrome, because Chrome, I don't know, it's not as good with MathJax. On the Mac side, it's getting better, but I've seen some people recommend Chromebox and Chrome to do the math support. Unfortunately, the PC side just does have more robust math support. Hopefully that will change, but that's up to screen readers, browsers, and the world at large. Just make proper, if you're making tables, make proper tables using the table function where you can specify row and column headers. Just do, run it through the accessibility checker. I mean, it's not going to be perfect, just like a spell checker can tell you that you spelled everything correctly if you just use the wrong word, but it will catch a lot of that low-hanging fruit, like, oh, you all your links say click here, or you didn't actually make a table, or the table headers look a little strange. I think you might have been making a list with p tags. You should make a list instead. Stuff like that. It might teach you a few things as well. Yeah, I think that's everything.
No, that's great advice. So we've talked a lot about how you can create content using this what you see is what you get editor here. And this editor is available anywhere you can input text inside of Brightspace. But it's not just the content that you create through this editor that has accessibility options. A lot of the default assignment types, the gradable assignments, the activities that students can engage in, learners can engage in, have their own accessibility features tied to them. For instance, this is a quiz in an English course about The Great Gatsby. If you look at the restrictions section of most assignment types, what you'll get is access to features that allow you to control how students interact with content. One of the key features to point out here is the special access feature. For quizzes, you can actually allow certain groups of users or individual users special access to an assessment. This means giving them a little more time before the assessment opens up, maybe giving them extended time to complete the assessment and turn it in. But being able to set special access is a terrific way to accommodate learners who have a need for additional access to a budgeted assignment. More often than not, when we're talking about best practices in the delivery of content, we want to be inclusive all the time. So giving students unlimited tries on a quiz, giving students additional time or open-ended time to access those sorts of assessments, those are best practices. They're always inclusive practices. But there are going to be times where you need to set special access for student users. When that time comes, just go to the restrictions section of your quiz, look for special access, toggle on the allow selected user special access, and from the next screen you can actually choose the level of access, how you widen the access for that student. Do you give them an earlier start date, a later end date? Do they have an additional due date that's maybe a little farther out? Can you have some timing where you can do recommended time limits or enforced time limits, and then you can enroll users directly into this special access by just searching their name and then adding them to the special access screen. In certain cases, when students actually interact with the content itself, you're going to want to be able to release content to those students in a way that honors their own differences and their own preferences in terms of how they learn. For this reason, I would recommend that as a matter of course, you make sure that you have the groups option enabled in your navigation bar. What groups allows you to do is to create groupings of students, and you can keep these groups, these group names completely hidden from student view, but you can choose individual groups. I've got one separate category of learning groups just for learning differences. Inside of the learning group category, you can create multiple groups based around learning differences that students might have. So in this particular case, I've got 4 different learning groups. One of them is very specifically for struggling readers. So when I go into the content page, when I want to create an individualized learning pathway for those learners, let's say we're talking about To Kill a Mockingbird, and inside of here, I want to make sure that those particular students get access to a reading guide. If I have a reading guide handy, so it just so happens that I have one on my desktop, what I can do is just grab that reading guide and drop it on the To Kill a Mockingbird unit folder. Once this differentiated reading instruction page is here, I can toggle it to visible so that it becomes visible to the students. And you could leave this open for all students if you wanted to. But you can also reserve this just for particular students. We do this through a set of specific rules that we call release conditions. All you would have to do to set release conditions for a particular item is click on that item, use the three-dot menu in the top right, select View Release Conditions, and then create some release conditions. Release conditions can be related to almost anything, from checklists that they create to grades that they earn on content. But in this particular case, we're looking at group enrollment. We know we have a group of struggling readers. If I release this content just to that struggling reader group, when that user logs in, they will see the content and they will also see this differentiated reading instruction guide. This would not be for every student, it would just be for the students who are in that special group. But this is a terrific way to release content to students to help them, assist them in their learning needs by using release conditions and group triggers. You can also trigger content to be released based upon performance in certain things. When we talk about individualized learning or we talk about inclusive learning, we not only want to be inclusive of students who may struggle with certain aspects of learning, but we want to include students who are doing really well. So if you've got students who are getting A's on all of their assignments, you can actually create release conditions that would release additional assignments for enrichment or give them access to additional reading materials so they can sort of grow their interest in particular subjects. Again, the idea here is to build truly inclusive lessons using these release conditions as triggers for content. Finally, the last two things we're going to talk about are actually features inside of Brightspace, and then we'll take a minute or two to gather any last minute questions and then close it out. We do have two specific tools that have a really important place in accessibility. One is the Read Speaker tool. Now, the Read Speaker tool requires a subscription, but you can get a 60-day free trial now if you want to just try it out. We have that Read Speaker functionality built into the platform by default. And what Read Speaker allows you to do is on any page that has text, simply click the play button.
The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald was originally...
This tool highlights words as it reads, and it reads that content out loud. This is terrific for almost every single student. I've used tools like this in the past, these screen reader tools. It's interesting how often students will gravitate towards a tool like this just to be able to have access to a voice reading behind you. But there are some students who absolutely need it. Students who are struggling readers benefit from having the word highlighted and having it read to them. Being able to read the text is an accessibility feature for someone who has visual limitations. Access to the Read Speaker tool is a terrific and really easy way to add accessibility features right to your course. And again, with a Read Speaker subscription, we can turn it on by default inside of your own Brightspace platform. The final tool I wanted to talk about is the virtual classroom tool. We do have a webinar style tool that's built right into the platform. The virtual classroom tool allows you to have multiple users on webcams. You can upload your own presentations. There are access to annotation tools inside the platform, but there are also some key features that you need to keep in mind whenever you're talking about accessibility inside of the virtual classroom environment. Just really quickly, Karen, what are some of the key accessibility features for virtual classroom?
Yeah, well, first of all, there is the ability for you to have a live captioner there to caption your virtual classroom stuff. That is a feature that is built into it. People can make certain speakers bigger on their screen. So if they want to see, say, an ASL interpreter better, they can make that camera bigger. They can do like picture in picture. They've done a lot of, they've given a few keyboard shortcuts. I think it would be awesome if there were a few more, but they do have some for muting and unmuting and doing, opening the actions bar and doing different things, which we have included in the document that's in the resources. Everything is keyboard accessible and labeled properly, so a screen reader or keyboard user can be able to find everything. Excuse me. They've just done a lot of really good work to make sure that everything works properly. The user manager, just to keep in mind, if you open up the users list, it makes more things you have to tab through. So when you're done with them, it probably helps to close them again, just so that you don't have as much stuff to navigate through. But there's a lot of good work in there.
Terrific, thanks, Karen. So you've gotten just a very, very brief view of a lot of the accessibility features that are available inside of Brightspace, but it doesn't really stop there. We have an entire page dedicated solely to accessibility, where we talk about our approach to accessible design. We talk about inclusive design. We give you access to compliance pages, links to other documents and resources. Karen even has a couple of featured videos here that you can go through and watch to learn more about our approach to accessibility at D2L, particularly accessibility for our inclusive design for all users of Brightspace. Now that we've sort of wrapped up the presentation, we have some time to take some questions. Sam, were there any questions that we need to address as sort of a follow-up here?
Yeah, David, I have been trying my best to have my fingers run over the keyboard quickly, but there are some that are still left. So one of the questions is, you're the best person to answer this. Will the students also see the titles of the groups like struggling learners, or will only teachers see the group titles? I think this refers to your SRP group.
Yes, so only the teachers will see the group titles. Students won't see those group titles. And the group titles are just to release that content. If you use the option to create discussion forums or something, because when you create a new group, you can actually create assignments and discussions specifically for that group. I think it will show in the title those options of those activity types by default. But that's only if you do it through that group screen. I generally recommend that you go ahead and just add users to groups and then use the release conditions to release special features to them. That way they're not sharing that title with others.
Privacy, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so June, if you think that you need further details, please type another question. Meanwhile, Anshula has a question. Do you recommend anything for English language learners?
So there are a number of terrific resources out there. English language learners, you may want to focus on having alternative language options for some of the homework assignments. What we found is that in general, too, providing resources for parents to sort of work alongside the student, especially for English language learners, having a wider community support is extremely beneficial. So I recommend that you do try to find those alternative assignments or have assignments with instructions for important parts of a project written out in separate languages, and then be able to release those if needed, but give those students the opportunity to learn through immersion as well.
And like captions and read speaker can both sort of help, because I've heard a lot of people who are using or learning English as a second language. It's helpful to see the words written and hear them, and it sort of helps create the link between the two. And then read speaker, same thing. Like seeing the words highlighted and hearing it spoken might help. Like depending on how much English they've learned so far, you know.
So again, another question is, any interactive whiteboards in Brightspace, the Bongo one?
Yeah, sure. So the virtual classroom tool actually allows teachers to to have an interactive whiteboard with students in a live session. You can record that session. So if you wanted to do a recorded lecture, with diagrams on the screen, you could essentially use the whiteboard inside of that space to diagram. It's also a terrific environment to use for one-on-ones with students. So if you've got learners who are struggling with a particular concept, you can pop into a virtual classroom instance really quickly. You can spin them up right away and then just set it to start right now. The student can then click on a safe link, jump into that experience, and then use the whiteboard to sort of diagram out the learning, talk about, you know, whatever they need to talk about. Both the teacher and the student can access the controls for that whiteboard. So you can both diagram at the same time.
Awesome. So you've already answered the next question. Can students write on the whiteboard too?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I think the answer is yes. Amazing. So I think between us, we have like, oh yeah, there's some more. Oh shoot, I had to move.
Yes, there can be breakout sessions, like in Zoom.
Hey,
There's
you're
a,
doing your stuff again.
yeah, I know. I keep stealing your stuff. Sorry, I just saw it and I'm like, oh,
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Karen is jumping right in to help. So yes, you can actually create breakout sections. We have 2 versions of the virtual classroom that are available inside of Brightspace. By default, you get, when you get a core version of Brightspace, you get the free version of virtual classroom inside of it, and that allows you to have multiple users in a session. You can record those sessions for up to an hour. Those recordings can live online in the cloud for 4 weeks, or you can download the videos and keep them, save them, and use them later. We do also have a premium version of that tool, though, that allows you to create small group breakout rooms. You can have recordings up to 4 hours long, and those recordings will live on the cloud for as long as you have a subscription to the virtual classroom premium option. And again, you can always download those tools as well. Both versions of virtual classroom allow you to have 7 individual webcams on at the same time. So if you've got a sign language interpreter, or you have multiple presenters who are using that tool, they can all share the video feed all at the same time.
So there's one question about, do we have a safeyoutube.net feature in our YouTube links?
So in the actual YouTube search, that's part of the Brightspace insert stuff settings. We don't. I think it's just general YouTube search, but I'll tell you what, if you want to leave an email address, I can get back to you on that. I'm not entirely certain, but one of the things that I've done in the past is I've used just a safe YouTube search bar, and then I've added that as an HTML element inside of a course. So there are ways to add safe search to your courses to protect your kiddos. Yeah.
So there's one more question, David. Where would I find the audio note? You know, we have audio notes and video notes.
Sure. Wherever you see the option to leave a video note, you often will have an option to leave an audio note as well. The audio note feature is most common inside of our portfolio tool, but you can also see it as part of the assignment tool. So when a student submits an assignment, they can either submit a file upload, they can type text in, or they can record audio or video as part of their submission. So you find the audio note feature present in a lot of different places inside of the Brightspace environment. Just wherever you see video note, look and see, and generally there's an audio option as well.
So, and then this question is about virtual classroom. So how would we invite students to virtual classroom? That's your forte.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of concern lately about how we can conduct safe webinar style meetings with students online, especially in the wake of what's been sort of coming up in the news lately. One of the things I love about the virtual classroom tool is that when you create a virtual classroom session, it doesn't generate a link that you would then share through email or share through text message or whatever. And that really is the most, that's the vulnerability right there, is sharing that link out. Once that link becomes public, it's problematic. But when you create a virtual classroom instance inside of Brightspace, it creates that instance as an assignment type. So when you go into the course content listing for a course, what a student will see is a virtual classroom link. So there's like the virtual office hours link here that's created. The student would just go into their course, click on the link. That would launch them into the session. The best part of all is that when the session is over, you automatically get the recording of the session as an element in your course. So here you can see the session recording along with the images of the whiteboard that was inside of the session, and then any recorded audio or video that was part of the session as well, just shows up right inside this link. So that's how you share the link. I do see this question about Flash Player, audio usually asking for Flash Player. I think this is a great question too. We've moved our video note away from Flash, so it doesn't require Flash anymore. Video note now is HTML5, and the audio tool is moving in the same direction. But that's a terrific question for folks who are worried about vulnerabilities via Flash. We are right up against our time limit. I am more than happy.
No questions left.
Oh, well, terrific.
There was one about Google Drive and whether it was included in insert stuff.
I have replied. It's in
okay.
quick link, insert quick link.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
You're right, Karen.
Yeah. Ah, perfect. Well, there you go.
28 questions, but anybody having any further questions, please feel free to email accessibility@d2l.com.
Yes, and then if you have general information about Brightspace, please don't hesitate to reach out to info@d2l.com. And thank you all so much for joining our session today.
Thank you, David and Karen, for doing an amazing job.
Wonderful, and thank you very much for joining us today. David, Karen, and Sam, we really appreciate the time you took to support the project. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Stay safe and be well. Thank you for joining us today.